actually stand remiss. I should have been recording that previous presentation, but I think I'll start now. I will try, if Jeff gives me leave, to make sure that these lectures are shared online with all the participants, so you could review them. I also have an audio record.
And just one other thing, we do have a whole lot of sticks. Some of you didn't get. We'll pass them out during the break, but it's got much broader material. It doesn't really matter for this. So the slides are available. This is a very focused version of the much bigger slide set.
I wanted to give this brief overview of 3 system science methodologies for 2 reasons. One is, for those for whom this is new, you may find you really need some orientation to understand some of the examples. However, many people within this audience are mature modelers in one of the 3 areas being discussed: system dynamics, agent-based modeling, and discrete event simulation. And I would argue that even for you, this lecture should confer some benefit. I am a quite pragmatic modeler. I use all 3 methods within our approaches. And what I find when engaging with practitioners of any one approach is that there's often too eager a framing of the terms of discourse of other approaches in their own, with respect to their own framing of their own approach. So in other words, rather than taking the time to really understand the research questions that motivate other approaches, to understand the distinctive texture of the motivations for these other approaches and what they're seeking to accomplish, there's an imposition of the assumption that they're trying to do the same sort of thing that we are, and we have a better tool than they do for those purposes. So for those who are experienced modelers, I'd ask you to put aside for a moment your assumptions about why you model, and to take a look at these each of these types of approaches with a set of fresh eyes, because they are distinguished not only in terms of the formalisms, the vocabulary we'll use to describe the model, although they do differ richly in terms of that, but also most fundamentally in terms of the questions being asked. I've listed a set of other characteristics that distinguish them here: the level of involvement of system stakeholders, the norms and attitudes towards rigor and data collection, the level of support provided for qualitative modeling, the level of focus on the modeling artifact as opposed to the modeling process. In each of these cases, you'll see a different balance of emphasis there, and it's important to recognize that. So we'll be giving a whirlwind glimpse of each of these, and I'm going to start with system dynamics models. System dynamics modeling is distinguished, as we'll see in the course of this week, by its use of qualitative model approaches. In this case, it's a causal loop diagram, for example, indicating some of the barriers in place for vaccination coverage and control of infectious disease. But they also make use of highly specified quantitative models, this being a TB model that we've worked on for Saskatchewan that's further stratified into 17 age categories, 2 ethnicity categories. And here we have a depiction in terms of stocks and flows of the flow of people among different health states associated with TB. So what is system dynamics? System dynamics is a feedback and accumulation-oriented perspective that's associated with a method, a perspective on problems, on helping to manage external systems that are complex. It includes a broad evolving methodology to help conceptualize, describe, analyze, and manage complex systems, particularly those where feedback, these phenomena where a given change in a part of the system will ripple around and cause a series of changes that either push back against or further amplify that initial change. So one of the big things that system dynamics seeks to address is overly narrow mental models. And the reflection of this is that many decisions are based on our understanding about how things work. And it may be a tacit understanding, it may be a poorly articulated understanding, but we have best guesses for what will happen, and we end up falling into certain types of decision making. And frequently the failure to anticipate and account for policy resistance, for situations where our choices don't secure the impact that we desire, is narrow mental models. and often we see a blame on side effects of some course of action we've undertaken that reflect the sort of ability to think through ahead of time what the full set of resulting effects will be. So system dynamics seeks a broader understanding of underlying system to change people's mental models, to change people's way of thinking, of conceptualizing the system, with the resulting benefits extending not only to personal decision making, but to more effective teams that are less likely to work in cross purposes. And the reflection here is that often it's the modeling process itself that's transformative, not just the artifact that we end up with, the runnable model with all the data involved. Though that may confer value, the greatest gain is often seen from the modeling process. So system dynamics offers qualitative and quantitative components, a defined sort of incremental methodology for delivering value throughout the process, the modeling process, from the very get-go with early meetings with stakeholders, making sure that they secure some insights early on. Time-honed techniques for working with diverse and interdisciplinary stakeholders. This is quite distinctive. For example, group model building efforts are quite prominent within system dynamics, and there's evolved a set of scripts for working effectively with stakeholders. It also, intriguingly, from my perspective as a computer scientist with background in language implementation, it offers a very rich graphical specification that allows a modeler to focus on what is being characterized and not so much on the how. A lot of the details are hidden in the same way that a spreadsheet hides a lot of the details of how things are calculated. You put in those formulae that say what depends on what, and you expect it to automatically, update when you make any changes to assumptions. In system dynamics, we have a very rich way of characterizing a system that doesn't require programming in a classic sense of the word. It also, however, is met with a very rigorous mathematical foundation that permits a wide variety of analysis tools. System dynamics traditionally has sought to participate or to foster participatory discussions, and really it's shaped in a way to allow for this sort of participatory engagement through the use of simpler formalisms and through the use of these sort of very graphical representations of a model that invite early stakeholder engagement and discussion, going from the very, very early qualitative stages. So within this area, we have these accumulations known as stocks and flows, which involve transitions of, say, individuals from one health state to another, and that quantify the number of individuals, say, flowing over per day between those stocks. And this sort of participation that's secured from stakeholders is not merely a nicety of having a client that's somewhat more satisfied. It's actually, in some cases, really enabling for helping a modeling project be sustainable, to allow it to continue, to allow it to secure the requisite support from the community or from a set of stakeholders that they're really willing to undertake a lot of the recommendations that come out of the process. So that was system dynamics. Agent-based models that we'll probably see a little bit more than any other approach during this week involve a very different characterization. We have one or more populations composed of individual agents, and each agent will be associated with some state, some sort of current status that will change over time. They'll be associated with parameters. Parameters that characterize their attributes that might change less frequently, typically do, and some rules for interaction, both to evolve internally and interaction with other agents. And they're typically embedded in some environment, sometimes involving localized elements as well as global elements. It could be spatial or topological. They could be in networks. They could be in some geographic space. In contrast to system dynamics, which uses a very small modeling vocabulary, stocks, flows, and a few sort of derivative types of variables, such as auxiliary variables. In agent-based modeling, we have a much larger modeling vocabulary that includes a wide variety of components that those who are staying for the full 5 days will familiarize yourself with. Things like events and state charts and mobility, support for mobility, etc. in agent-based modeling, we have a very different organizational of a model than we do in system dynamics. And as we'll see, this will facilitate representation of nested relationships and context. So with system dynamics modeling, we typically subdivide a population into a set of states that are distinguished by the characteristics or state of that individual. So here we're organizing the model according to characteristics of the individuals, and we'll simply count the number of individuals with each set of characteristics, with each combination of characteristics. So they're subdivided according to state or other characteristics. And if we have components of the model that express things at different levels of aggregation, for example, a summary of things across the entire model, it's just one more variable that's at the same level of as the others within the model. So here we might have some lower level and then a total that's a total up across the population. By contrast, with an agent-based modeling, we, instead of organizing the model by state or characteristics, we organize the model according to an individual, to individuals. And then each individual maintains its own state. So rather than organizing according to state and counting the number of individuals, we organize according to individuals, and that maintains their state. These individuals can be embedded in networks, in a geographic context, in a regular spatial context, etc. And we can very well capture nesting of relationships. So frequently we'll build multi-scale models where we have individual people, we might have schools, we might have neighborhoods, we have cities, and then a region, say a state here in Australia. And the really nice thing about agent-based modeling is that each of these successive levels of context is nested in a way that mirrors the external world. We have sort of this corresponding mirroring within our model. We can ask very readily, for example, what are the people or what are the neighborhoods located within the city? What are the statistics on those neighborhoods? And for those within each of those neighborhoods, what are the associated schools? And we have this kind of isomorphism between the external world on the one hand and what's in our model, this parallel sort of nesting hierarchies, which is very convenient. Individuals within these contexts may have some properties that are discrete, that take on a set of defined values that are small in number or are very directly countable. So ethnicity, gender, for example. But they may also be continuous categories, things like age, things like someone's metabolic rate or their weight or their historical birth rate or what have you. We'll use descriptions of individual behavior which vary on a per model basis. One of the most popular forms, which has been greatly advanced through the advent of any logic, is with state charts. Here we classify a given individual as being in one particular state with respect to a particular phenomena, and over time they may change between states. And particular individuals may be associated with many state charts that characterize, say, different health conditions for that individual, their progression with respect to education and with respect to other criteria of interest. We may also, in some cases, have hybrid models where we describe an individual's behavior over time using some elements that include stocks and flows, that include system dynamics components. Individuals can be placed in networks. For example, we may have one individual here who's located in a particular position, and then we'll have linkages between them and others. And in some models that we'll be seeing, we'll have spatial context and movement of individuals over time within geographical areas, and sometimes multiple levels of behavior, in this case herd behavior as well as individual behavior. So these matters of scale, the fact that we can build multi-scale models is one of the big goals of these sorts of models, and it's quite readily done in any logic in contrast to many other frameworks. The final type of approach that I'll give a glimpse of here is discrete event simulation. And this is a process-centric modeling approach. Our focus here is often on the underlying processes through which individuals will flow over time. While we may have an articulation at the level of the individual, those individuals are often more passive and they flow through a set of processes that operate upon them, contingent on the availability of some resources. Any logic provides a very rich manner of, in fact, hierarchically characterizing the flows of individuals within these systems in a way that can involve loops, in a way that can involve splits for individuals who are treated in different fashions. And then those individuals can be embedded in a spatial context by which they move around, can be visualized. So we have entities that represent individuals flowing through processes and being processed, and flowcharts will specify this process, specify this behavior. Resources are going to be required for processing of those individuals. For example, you may need an X-ray to be imaged for a possible bone break. In other cases, you may need a gurney to be transported, or a wheelchair. And in other cases, the resources that are needed may be actors with agency, things like doctors and nurses who can move around. Agent entities will interact with resources, so there'll be an association between a given patient, say in a wheelchair, such that they move around with the wheelchair. And a doctor may be assigned to that patient in a way that will follow that patient through their various activities within a given encounter with the healthcare system. Resources will have homes, and there'll be movement paths through the system. We'll be covering this sort of modeling as well as its interaction with agent-based modeling, something that AnyLogic has been seeking to make easier and easier, but which is already very accessible in our existing form of AnyLogic. And we'll be seeing how we can distinguish resource pools for different sorts of resources and characterize those resources according to a variety of types that reflect their underlying nature. So those are all my comments on the three modeling types. I hope you'll carry away an appreciation not only for the different vocabularies used, but the different goals of these approaches, what they're seeking to accomplish with the modeling process. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Andre.
Yeah, do you want to answer any questions?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Are there any questions from either the Y modeling or this glimpse of the three approaches that I've given here? Sure. Okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Questions?